Welcome to Economy Made Simple. I am Shamubeel Eaqub, the Chief Economist at Simplicity. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and I'm here to make sense of it. Brought to you by Simplicity, New Zealand's non-profit KiwiSaver and fund manager, who are on a mission to make Kiwis richer and smarter with money. Hello, I'm Shamubeel and welcome to Economy Made Simple. Today I want to speak to you about my vision for KiwiSaver 2.0. It's time that KiwiSaver grew up, and I want to give you my ideas of the kinds of changes that will follow very closely on the steps of what Australia has done and hopefully give us the same kind of benefits that they're enjoying today. The reason why we have to think about superannuation and KiwiSaver very seriously is because, quite frankly, our fiscal math doesn't work. We have an aging population that we haven't prepared for. When it comes to an aging population, it becomes an issue because our current bundle of promises on public services and taxes don't add up. We need roughly about 5 working age people per retiree, and we don't have that. Currently, we have about 4 working age people per retiree, and in 50 years' time, we'll only have 2. So the fiscal pressures that we're experiencing today will only get harder as time goes on. We are going to have some big choices around what we do with taxes, with around superannuation, but also, I think within all of this, is a big conversation about how can we make KiwiSaver bigger and better so that more New Zealanders are prepared for retirement and have more choices then. Currently, there's a bunch of myths that somehow New Zealand's superannuation and our current system of government is sustainable. When it comes to our taxes and our public services, they are simply not compatible with an aging population. We're already running, demographically speaking, a structural deficit. What that means is that unless we're doing something differently with a very strong economy or borrowing more money, our current system of public services and taxes don't add up. One of the big issues of the future is going to be superannuation because it's a very expensive program. Of course, it's very, very generous, and that makes it very easy for New Zealanders to retire compared to many other parts of the world. And there are parts of this we need to protect for those who need it the most. The challenge for us is that New Zealand superannuation is already very expensive and set to become even more expensive as we have more people reaching retirement age and people in retirement live longer. Those two things are going to make it much harder for us to afford not just superannuation, but also additional pressures like the spend on healthcare, the spend on housing support, and the like. And because we're running out of young people, relatively speaking, we will have a smaller tax base to be able to work from. And the situation is going to become much harder in the not too distant future. Over the course of the next 25 years, pretty much all of the taxes from work will be spent on just 2 things: New Zealand super and health. I cannot see the politics of that lasting very long. We will need to prepare, and one of those things we can do to prepare individually is to make sure we save for our retirement and we prepare to give ourselves choices. But I think we also need to make sure KiwiSaver, which is currently voluntary and a good start, it could be made bigger, better, and a stronger part of the solution going forward. When we talk about New Zealand super, quite often there's a bit of misunderstanding. And that misunderstanding quite often is around how superannuation is paid for. In New Zealand, we have a system what you describe as a pay as you go rather than a save as you go. What that means is that those who are paying taxes now pay for those people who are currently retired. So all the taxes that you're paid through your working life wasn't for you to retire on. It was for those people who are currently retired. So we never prepared for the future. The difference with something like KiwiSaver is it's a save-as-you-go system because we're saving through our working life, and when we retire, that money becomes available for us to be able to access it. Already, we're spending close to $8,000 per worker in terms of superannuation subsidies. So as the working age gets older, as people get older, as society gets older, we're going to find the burden on young people and working people is going to become greater and greater. The liabilities on New Zealand super over the course of the next 100 years is in the order of $1 trillion. So we have not saved enough for that at all. And the money that we have in the New Zealand Superannuation Fund, the money that's saved up in KiwiSaver is still not enough to get us there. So we do need to do something differently. We do need to make some changes, and we need to make them quick smart if they're to give next generation more choices. KiwiSaver started less than 20 years ago. Since that time, it has delivered some pretty big gains. And the biggest gain has been behavioral. When it started, less than 20% of households used to save regularly. Less than 20%. Today, it's more like 60% of New Zealanders that save regularly. That is a sea change in New Zealanders' behavior in terms of how we look after money. But we haven't seen policy keeping up. What has happened is that KiwiSaver has been tinkered with over and over again, and many of those small changes have made KiwiSaver less attractive. For example, the subsidies for joining up have been taken away. The subsidies for your contributions have been reduced. And as these things have come through, the signal that we're seeing from our policymakers and our politicians is that KiwiSaver is important, but we're not going to do anything to strengthen it. And yet, all the signals of the future of an aging population, the fiscal pressures that will come, are very much about we have to make KiwiSaver stronger if we're to give future generations choices about how to manage this process. When it comes to KiwiSaver's next iteration, we don't have to look far for inspiration. Australia already has a system that works pretty well. We could steal bits of it and it would make our system much better. The reason why Australia is such a great example is because not only have they got a pension system that is sustainable, that aging population is something that's a risk that's largely managed, but also as people have been saving for their retirement, along the way, they have also invested significantly in their own economy. Whether it's in infrastructure or in their businesses, Australia has put huge amounts of money into their own country. Aussies investing in Aussies, that makes Aussies better off. I want to have the same in New Zealand too, where our KiwiSaver gets bigger, and along the way we invest some of our savings into our own country. As we move from a country that is capital shallow to one that's capital rich, a savings poor country to a savings rich country, we want to also move from a country that has an infrastructure deficit and a low capital intensity of businesses to one that has sufficient amounts of great infrastructure and businesses that are using the best technology and the best skills. When I look at what's happened in Australia, but also more widely across countries like Singapore, Netherlands, and the UK, there are some really good choices that are in front of us. KiwiSaver can be part of the solution for our aging population, but also in that, how do we unleash the productive capacity that's absolutely there? The first big idea is compulsion. Compulsion is something that New Zealand actually experimented with in 1975. We already had a compulsory New Zealand superannuation scheme. And if we had stuck with it, we would currently have $1 trillion of investments in those pension funds. But of course, we don't, because a government at the time decided not to pursue that. The next best time, of course, is now. But there are some little tweaks that I'd like to see in how we do that. So right now, KiwiSaver has employer contributions and employee contributions, and many poor people or low-income people don't contribute because they can't afford to make that employee contribution or their own voluntary contribution. As a result, they miss out on their retirement savings. My suggestion is that we disconnect the employee contributions from the employer contributions, make the employer contribution compulsory for every job, and increase that gradually over time to around 10 to 12%. In places like Netherlands, it's more like 18%. And that means that when you retire, your income in retirement is very similar to what you had in those last decade of working life. So I don't think New Zealand can get there quickly. I think it's too high a bar, but I think 10 to 12% would be sufficient to give people comfort in retirement. We should absolutely have some tax incentives to help people to do that. But unfortunately, that is becoming harder and harder to sustain. Our fiscal position is in dire straits, and compulsion on its own would be much, much easier. If we have compulsory KiwiSaver today, in a few decades, we will have the opportunity to assess whether New Zealand Super as it stands can be reformed to make it more affordable for future generations, either through means testing or something else. But unless we have enough people who have enough money saved up by the time, we will not have that choice. It's very, very important for us to take that step sooner rather than later. And compulsion has been shown in countries around the world, but particularly in Australia, that if done well, it will have a lot of good positive outcomes for the retirement system. The second big idea is a rethink around hardship. At the moment, we think about KiwiSaver hardship access as something that's very much at the edge, that you really have to go through a lot of hurdles to access. And the reality is that that may not necessarily be the best outcome. For a lot of lower income people, accessing that retirement savings today might give them a better outcome than in retirement. It might be that we think about how we access or how we save our money. There are things called sidecars that can work really, really well. And so to give you an example, so let's say you're a low income person and you are contributing into KiwiSaver, but that first goes into this savings account. And if you don't use it, it then tips over into your retirement account. And what it does is it gives you that ability to manage that shocks in life, whether it's the car breaking down or the job loss or whatever. It means that you're able to access your resources better. KiwiSaver is already much more than a pension scheme. It's too late to pretend that it's some kind of pure retirement scheme. It's already available for things like first home buyer grants. It already allows hardship. We should probably think about how we can make those hardship rules fair for a much wider group. But we need to make sure we do it with some education, particularly in financial education, so people are making good decisions when it comes to dipping into that savings pool. But hardship is one of those things that would make a compulsory retirement scheme, a compulsory KiwiSaver scheme, much more palatable to all groups of society. And the third big idea around KiwiSaver is to have a baby KiwiSaver. What we know about KiwiSaver and savings in general is the longer you're in it, the better it is. The power and the magic of compounding makes everything so much better. I look at Singapore for inspiration. They enroll at birth, and I think we should do the same. In New Zealand, you already get an IRD number when you are born. Why shouldn't we also think about getting a KiwiSaver account at the same time? If we could, for example, give $10 per child per week, it would cost us about $500 million a year in government subsidies. But the impact of that would be significant benefits for our children in the future. By age 18, pretty much everybody would be becoming an adult with $15,000 in their bank account. And if they didn't use it at age 15, they might have an extra $100,000 at age 65 when they retire. This is all adjusted for cost of living. And what it also does is it creates a much stronger connection with savings and money from an early age. That positive habit that is formed by having that savings account is really quite powerful. There have been some really good pilots that have been done in the US and in the UK. And what they show is that the positive benefit is not just for the child who has the savings account, but it also works for the whole family. Because when we see that positive contribution, that habit of saving and the power of compounding coming together, and you see this nest egg that's building up, that quite often has a really good impact of lifting up that whole family. So Baby KiwiSaver is one of those ideas that I think would be relatively low cost in the scheme of things, but have some really significant benefits for our future generations, but also for many of our families who are currently not saving. So to bring it all together, KiwiSaver's already been a great success, but it can be and must be so much better than it is. And there are three ideas that I think will do that. One is making the employer contribution compulsory. The second is making our hardship rules fairer for lower income people. And third, getting our kids started at age 0. If we do these things, I think KiwiSaver will become a powerhouse for future generations. Thank you for joining me today. Everything we cover in this session is for general information only. We are not tailoring our comments to your financial situation or providing financial advice or recommendations. This information and comments we provide are not intended to convey any guarantees as to the future performance of any investment products, asset classes, or capital markets. Past performance is no guarantee of future performance. Please refer to our full disclosure statement in the description.